Summer routines live or die by how easy they are, and honestly, if something takes too much effort, I'm out. That's why Groons is my go-to. It's my one daily pack of gummies covering my greens, vitamins, and minerals. Plus, it has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber, which is more than 2 cups of broccoli. No mixing powders, no giant pills, no hassle. I just rip open the pack and I'm done. They taste good and they make it easy to stay on top of my health, even when life gets busy. Save up to 52% with the code PODCAST at Groons.co. That's code PODCAST at GRUNS.co.
The Dialed In Angling Podcast, presented by OnX Fish, Arneson's Rocky Point Resort, Strike Master, and 13 Fishing. Well, welcome back to this week's edition of the Dialed In Angling Podcast. We are going to dive in to the entire subject of bug hatches. Right now, on our lakes, currently, I've been on Mille Lacs. I've been on a couple small lakes. I've talked to some friends this morning from Leech Lake, and the bugs are here. We're getting major mayfly hatches, a couple different bug species on Mille Lacs hatching. You know, a lot of anglers hear that word bug hatch. They immediately think negative. I want to talk strategy for bug hatches, the good, the bad, the ugly, some of the things that you can encounter. For me, you know, it always seems like it shifts fish from certain locations to the next location, and it's not always a bad thing. I want to talk through ways that you can combat a bug hatch, some of the best techniques you can do to catch walleyes and smallmouth bass, and some of the things that you can do during a bug hatch and just after post-bug hatch to put more fish in the boat, because that's the key. And right now they're coming. There's nothing you can do about it. It always seems about mid-June to late June, even early July sometimes, is when we get those giant bug hatches. It happens every single year on a lot of our big lakes. The further north you get, usually it's a little more delayed. Like I said, it's happening right now on Mille Lacs. You can see the bugs on your screen. They haven't quite hatched yet, but they will be in the next couple days here. Leech Lake, it's happening. And like I said, I've been on a couple small lakes where the walleyes were spitting up mayflies. I could see lots of bug activity, so I knew it was coming. Let's dive right into how I go about fishing walleyes. Okay, some of my go-to techniques during the bug hatch to put fish in the boat. And when you recognize the fact that, especially the big like hexagenias, the mayflies, you know, you get so many people that think of a mayfly, and in their head, they think May, that's when they hatch, is in May. Well, that may be the case, southern United States. I'm not sure where they got their name mayfly. You know, the big hexagenias, the great big ones. For Mille Lacs, Leech, a lot of lakes I can think of, it typically happens in mid to late June. Sometimes on Mille Lacs, it's been after the 4th of July when we've had this big hatch. And really, a lot of our big fisheries, it doesn't all happen at once. It seems like bugs hatch at different areas around the lake at different times. Yes, there's certainly some times where the entire lake is covered. But I know Leech Lake, for example, there's areas where you can get away from some of the bug hatch while it's happening. I've had times where Walker Bay is exploded with bug hatch, but then the main lake hasn't, and vice versa, where, you know, the main lake, there was a big monster hatch, and then you were able to slip into Walker Bay on Leech Lake and get away from some of that bug activity. So there is some of that, but also some of these key techniques that I like using during this time period to put them topside. So if you come out to Mille Lacs, or if you're going to a big body of water, or even it could be a small lake. There's so many small lakes that, you know, these mayflies hatch in year after year after year, where, you know, their life cycle, they go up in the air, they breed, they drop their eggs, and they're gone. You know, they spend a larger portion of their life underwater. You know, we start seeing perch and walleyes spitting up bugs into late January, first part of February, into March. That activity really starts to ramp up. I think sunlight plays a key role into, you know, hatching these things out of the mud. And then inevitably, you know, a lot of the smaller fish, the perch, the smaller walleyes, they're feeding on these bugs all winter long into the spring. And, so that carries over to the spring. As we get towards this time period, you're seeing different bug hatches emerge off the bottom, rising in the water column at different stages as they get ready to turn into a fly, and then, of course, hatch, go up in the air, breed, and die. A clear indication, if you're pulling up to Mille Lacs, you're pulling up to Leech, you get up to a gas pump in the morning, you're stopping at your local bait shop, and there's bugs in the air, the hatch is happening. It's on. Mille Lacs has hundreds of different insect hatches throughout the year. So this is just an ongoing thing. It starts quite quickly after opener. You start to get these little bug hatches that happen. They go all the way through June into July, even August. We have different hatches. And I've even seen hatches as late as October, where you get a little bit of a warm up, some bug activity in early October. So these things are occurring all over the lakes all season long. And it's just not a Mille Lacs thing. A lot of these small lakes, you have black fly hatches, you have all sorts of different hatches. Having said that, most anglers just sort of cringe at the fact that it's a bug hatch because they know that it's going to pose a challenge. Now, I would say if you're walleye angler, and especially if you have forward-facing sonar, you have a leg up on a lot of people during a bug hatch because there are so many suspended fish. Back in the day, you'd have a giant, let's say, mayfly hatch on Mille Lacs, and it would move fish more than it would prevent them from biting, if that makes sense. That it seems like these fish will move locations. They'll travel to these areas. I knew it was starting on Mille Lacs because I was catching fish and still in those shallow rocks and different areas. All of a sudden, those fish started disappearing. They started sliding out a little bit deeper. They started sliding out to the transitions. I started seeing it on my graph, on my 2D graph, on my forward-facing sonar. Leech, the same thing, talking to Rem up there. A lot of different other buddies. We network all the time, so we're talking fishing all the time. We share different customers. So, we're just sharing information. Rem called me this morning and was like, man, the bug hatch was on. And inadvertently, the last few days have been a little bit up and down. And Nick Sakella was up there, same thing. A good bite one day, bad the next. It's because a lot of these fish are moving. They're feeding on bugs. They're up in the water column. I was on a small lake the other day. Same thing. The fish were up in the water column. I actually thought they were mainly smallmouth bass because they were so high in the water column, but they weren't moving like bass. Bass really move up and down in the water column. The particular lake I was on had a ton of smallmouth, a ton of walleyes. And so these fish were up in the water column. All the fish were. The smallmouth bass were up high. The walleyes were up high. And so I just started throwing on them. It was just a jig crawler, a bobber, and started picking off these schools of fish. Immediately, I noticed that when some of these fish were coming up to the surface, especially the bass, they were spitting up mayfly nymphs. And so right then and there, I knew, okay, all of this activity I'm seeing on my screen, I've identified that they're mayflies. I'm going to switch to night crawlers. So let's just dive right into it. Let's start with bobber fishing. I want to kind of categorize a couple of my key techniques that I like using during the bug hatch. We're going to break down like my top 3. I also want to touch on some smallmouth bass fishing too, because I absolutely love smallmouth bass fishing during a bug hatch. If you have any negative thoughts about bug hatches for walleyes, you should have positive thoughts about bass fishing during a bug hatch because it's incredible. It only signifies some of the best topwater fishing that you can have all season long. So before I get sidetracked, though, let's just dive right into the walleyes and my top 3 techniques. Let's start with bobbers, okay? Love bobber fishing during a bug hatch. These fish are typically in tight groups. When you find them, they're up in the water column. Prior to forward-facing sonar, we used to do a ton of power bobber fishing, and it always was right around that same time that you started experiencing these bug hatches, whether it was the big mayfly hatch or some other hatches that were going on. The power corking bite was born because of bug hatches. And so power corking, in a nutshell, is basically just driving around till you see these pods of fish on your 2D sonar or your side imaging back in the day. And then as soon as you saw these fish, you would launch your cork on these fish. Now, the key element to setting your depth on these fish is recognizing at what depth these fish are sitting. And what's cool about a lot of these bug hatches is from day to day to day, they will be at certain depths around, let's say, a gravel bar, on the outsides of mud flats. So it may change a little bit based on your locations, but your depth will be very consistent. I find it pretty consistent. And now with the water really clearing up on a lot of our lakes, especially with zebra mussels, you can set your depth about a foot, foot and a half above these fish. And how I do so is not by just guessing with my arm length. I actually take my bobber, drop it right in front of my forward-facing sonar, right by my 2D transducer in the back. So if I'm seeing the fish on my graph at 14 feet, like I run a Lowrance unit. So if I see them at 14 feet, you can actually touch the screen. It will tell you 14.4 feet. Whatever the top of that arc is, I want to go about a foot to a foot and a half above those fish with my presentation. And so what I'll do is I'll take my bobber, and it's much easier like on your forward-facing sonar if you use like a depth bomb or something, but I'll hook a depth bomb on my jig. I'll actually set that depth bomb 1 to 1.5 feet above where I'm seeing these fish. That way it gives me a little bit of wiggle room. If I'm seeing these pods of fish, the baits are going to be presented just above them. You got to remember, they're feeding up. They're feeding on bugs. The water's clear. Sometimes you can get away with even 2 feet above them, but I like that foot, foot and a half. That gives me a good range. So if I'm seeing the fish at 14 feet, I'm going to set it about 12, 12 and a half feet. Okay. So that gives you that foot and a half to 2 foot mark just above the fish. Now, driving around, I used to use side imaging, my 2D sonar to recognize the fish. Now that the water has gotten so clear and the fish are much more spooky, if you have forward-facing sonar, you're going to get on top of these fish much, much quicker. And what I'd like to do is recognize where the fish are at, try to keep them at 50 or 60 feet. And now this is another key element, not just to setting your depth to the right depth, but keeping these fish away from your boat. If you drive within 50 feet of them, especially on a calm day, you're going to spook a lot of these fish and they won't bite. On Mille Lacs, on Leech, on Winnie, on all of our lakes where it's gotten clear, the key to catching these fish with forward-facing sonar is keeping them at a distance, okay? Not running over the top of them. And so what we do is power corking is basically the same as it was back in the day, only you're using forward-facing sonar. I use my front trolling motor, or I'll use it on a pole. I'll drive around until I see these pods of fish that are just off the edge of structure, put the brakes on either with the big motor or the trolling motor, cast right on top of them with me and my customers, spot lock, and just wait for a bite. Okay, this is power corking 101. My simple setup on my bobbers goes as follows: slip knot, bead, bobber, bead. This is where you're going to want to go to the store right now or write this down. But sniper swivel, VMC sniper swivel. I usually use an 1/8 ounce size, depending on my depth. But usually if I'm power corking in a bug hatch like this, I'm either going to use a 16th ounce VMC sniper swivel or an 1/8 ounce sniper swivel, and then about a 2 to 3 foot leader, a 16th ounce jig, and either a leech or half a night crawler. Okay, so it's slip knot, bobber, or slip knot, bead, bobber. I like to put a bead just above my sniper swivel, about a 3 foot leader, and then your jig head and your leech or your night crawler. You'll see a lot of times where, especially if there's 2 people in the boat, always rig one person up with a leech, the other person up with a night crawler. That way, when you're driving around, you'll know pretty quickly what they're feeding on. A lot of times during a bug hatch or pre-bug hatch, you'll have this really good leech bite, and then all of a sudden it'll just change to crawlers. So if that's the case, you can quickly just pivot and everybody use a crawler or everybody use a leech, depending on the mood of the fish. And it might change from location to location. I've seen it so many times where you're in the gravel and they want a leech, and then you're out on the mud and they want a crawler, or you're on Leech Lake and the main body of water, they want a night crawler, and maybe in Walker Bay, they want a leech, or vice versa. So from location to location, your bait may change, but really just keeping your depth just above those fish. The sniper swivel is going to help you get on top of those fish quickly. If you're seeing fish that are really high in the water column, I'm just going to give you a point of advice right now. to cast past them, okay, and bring your bobber to them. It usually doesn't matter when it's windy and stuff, but I've seen walleyes 3, 4, 5, 6 feet underneath the water, feeding on bugs, feeding on the bait that's feeding on bugs, and you cast a bobber on top of them, you spook those fish immediately. And so if you can cast that bobber past those fish and then bring it to them, if you're noticing they're spooking on that, if they're spooking as a result of the bobber, cast just past them or past them and let it float into them. That's going to help you catch more fish as well. The other thing with the bobbers too is that sniper swivel. I can't tell you how much I love the sniper swivels for a couple reasons. One, it's that added weight where you can get down there quickly, especially if it's windy. You know, these fish are moving. If they're up in the water column, they're moving. You're trying to hit a moving target. And so you're always trying to figure out which way they're going, which way they're feeding. That sniper swivel, that VMC sniper swivel is going to be your best friend when it comes to bobber fishing because you can get down there quickly. You can, drop that presentation right in front of their face. That 16th ounce jig will fall a little bit slower. You can even use a plain hook. If they get really finicky, just going with the sniper swivel, about a 3-foot lead, a plain hook, and you're going to work wonders. But that sniper swivel is the key to this bobber equation. And then, of course, having the right bobber rod. You know, I use that 7.9 power corking rod from 13 Fishing. I helped design that rod. We worked on that rod last year. If you haven't checked it out, it's in the Myth series. I absolutely love it. That 7.9 blank gives you plenty of backbone. It gives you casting power. I can't tell you how much, having the right rod coupled with the right line, coupled with the right VMC swivel and the right jig to get that out there. Because think about it this way. If you're trying to keep these fish at 50, 60, 70 feet, if you don't have the right rod, if you don't have the right line, if you don't have the right setup with the sniper swivel, you just can't get out there in the wind. You really can't. If you have that 7.9 blank where you can hoist that rod out or hoist that bait out there, I use 8-pound monofilament. Okay. I know some people like braid. I love monofilament. I use Suffix Advanced Mono. 8-pound is my main line, but I can huck that bait out there with that sniper swivel and land on them. I mean, they call it a sniper swivel for a reason. You can snipe those fish with that thing. It's going to be your best friend. And having that 7.9 Myth rod is killer. I mean, I can reach out and touch them. So many times I see fish at 60, 70, 80 feet, and I have no problem dropping on a dime on those fish, even in the wind. And so huge bobber fishermen, when you get into these time periods where they're feeding up in the water column, it's really, really fun, especially on our clear bodies of water. One of my second go-tos along those same lines, if those fish are either shying away from the bobber or they keep coming up and they won't feed on the bobber, is going to like a jig crawler. Jig crawlers, obviously a ton of tournament anglers. You talk to any of these tournament anglers nowadays, when they're sniping walleyes, they're using jig crawlers, using, varying different jigs, whether it's an 1/8 ounce jig, 1/4 ounce, depending on their depth. But my typical setup is I like using like an 1/8 ounce. You can use a VMC Ned head jig. I like using the tungsten moon eyes, even just a moon eye jig in that 1/8 ounce, and rigging a night crawler on there, half a night crawler. And then when I'm seeing those fish out at, 40, 50, 60, 70 feet, actually pitching to those fish with a half a night crawler and swimming that bait over the top of them. Now, during a bug hatch, there's different ways that you can fish a jig crawler. A lot of people fish a jig crawler, dump it to the bottom. Those walleyes that chase to the bottom, hit it. A lot of times during the bug hatches, I just keep it swimming. Okay. I'll keep it above their heads and I'll swim it really slow and just sort of jigging that rod tip really slow, much like you'd be fishing a minnow. Like, all the bass anglers nowadays, a minnow shaker rod, that sort of thing. I'm doing the same thing with a night crawler, but just sort of shaking that rod tip and bringing that crawler slowly back to the boat, trying to get these fish to strike. And let me tell you, on dead flat calm days where they're not hitting the bobbers or they're coming up and analyzing the bait, they just won't hit it, this jig crawler technique will help you catch more fish. So, if you're throwing bobbers on them and you've thrown at, 100 different walleyes that are just not biting, they're not eating it, that's when you just switch over to this jig crawler technique. So it's sort of that 1-2 punch with live bait. Another bait that I absolutely love along these same lines is using the Crush City Mooch Minnows, that 2.5, that they make a really small size now, that 2.5 size. Not only are these walleyes feeding on bugs, but they're also feeding on a lot of bait that's up in the water column. And so by using these microplastics on an 1/8 ounce jig, you could use an 1/8 ounce tungsten, you could use an 1/8 ounce lead head jig, whether it's a moon eye, a tungsten moon eye. Again, a Ned head works great. But throwing it out there and working that mooch minnow, that Crush City mooch minnow over the top of these fish. During a bug hatch, you'll catch so many walleyes on that little tiny finesse bait. Same thing along those same lines, marabou hair. Marabou hair, hair jigs, even a bucktail. You can tip the bucktail with half a nightcrawler, or you can just run it straight. But same thing, a really light hair jig works wonders as well. So those are sort of my go-tos during the bug hatch. One more that I want to touch on is the jerk bait. I think the jerk bait, where it really shines, has gotten a ton of publicity over the last year and a half. I know Brett McComas at Target Walleye keeps talking about it. A lot of other anglers, tournament anglers. For me, it was the best kept secret forever when it came to walleyes, just because I fished so many jerk baits on Mille Lacs. For smallmouth, I found out that walleyes love them. And during a bug hatch, if you want to get good at fishing a jerk bait, during a bug hatch is when you're going to want to do it. Stay tuned. When I come back, I'm going to talk jerk bait fishing. We're going to get into my cadence as how as I fish a jerk bait, the type of jerk baits that I fish, and some of the key sizes, colors, all of that stuff. Stay tuned. We got more Dialed In Angling after this. OnX Fish is the best tool I have ever used for finding new lakes to target. Quickly filter lakes by species, then select trophy potential, high abundance, keeper potential, or high stocking effort to find the fish you are after in the size and the numbers you are trying to catch. Download from the App Store today to get research tools for the serious anglers and beginners alike, giving you the data to target the right lakes and the confidence to get there. Use tools like recent imagery, fishing hotspot data, or the best-in-class weather features that call out current wind, weather, barometer, moon phase, majors and minors, along with precip and more. OnX Fish is a phenomenal tool both on and off the water for discovering new fishing opportunities, many of which you'd never known existed. Download OnX Fish Midwest today, the app that is changing the game on ice and open water. Okay, continuing the topic of bug hatches and different types of bites. You know, I've described in depth my bobber techniques. I've described in depth, sort of my jig crawler, pitching a jig in a plastic, a hair jig. Let's dive right into jerkbait fishing, because I think jerk baits for walleyes are one of the deadliest baits that you can use, especially this time of year. Jerk baits for me, it's either the walleyes are extremely keyed in on them or they're not hitting them. Okay, it's like night and day. It's like either they're the best bait in the world, it's a cheat code, and they're just absolutely womping them, or they're not on them. This time of year during the bug hatch is one of the best times of year that you can get fish to go on a jerk bait all over the place. So if you pull up to your favorite local lake, you recognize a bug hatch is going on, these walleyes are high in the water column, it's time to pull out the jerk baits. And it's one of the funnest ways to fish, to catch them, to be honest with you. The way the walleyes hit them, I'm a huge fan of jerk bait fishing. I've spent years and years and years fishing jerk baits for smallmouth on Mille Lacs, all over the place. I love throwing hard baits for smallmouth. Any opportunity I get to fish a jerk bait, spring, fall, during key periods, I do so. In doing so, I found out walleyes absolutely love them. Okay. And I've caught so many walleyes and jerk baits, not just on Mille Lacs, but all over the place. You go all over, Leech Lake, Winnie, Gull, the list is endless as far as the amount of lakes that I've fished where I've caught not only walleyes on jerkbaits, but big walleyes on jerkbaits. Heading out to the Great Lakes, even Green Bay, and different areas where the jerkbait was the reason I was successful, and also the reason I caught so many big ones, right? But it doesn't matter. You'll throw a let's say a shadow wrap or a Maverick 110. I mean, that's a big bait. If you look at those baits, they're bigger profile baits, but I've caught 14-inch walleyes up to 31-inch walleyes on jerk baits. So here are my go-tos, okay? There's a lot of different jerk baits out there, obviously dating back to the Husky jerk is one of the original Rapala jerk baits. Husky jerks still work really well, especially in the spring and fall. But sort of my go-tos during the bug hatch, or if I want to dive down a little bit deeper, if I want to target fish that are, kind of in that teener range, or if I'm casting a really sharp break, because a lot of times during these bug hatches, these bugs are coming up off the bottom, off those sharper breaks, those transitions. The walleyes are following the bait up, they're following the bugs up, and so they're up in the water column off the edge. So what I like throwing, here's my two absolute go-tos. The Maverick 110, okay, that's a Rapala bait, that's a suspending jerk bait. It's got the Redline series hooks. I love everything about that bait. The other one is the Shadow Wrap Deep in particular. So they have a Shadow Wrap Shad, they have a Shadow Wrap Deep. I mainly fish the Shadow Wrap Deep and the Maverick 110, the deep divers. So those are like my two go-tos, okay? Depending on the forage that these fish are keying on, I've been out in Sakakawea where they want, a a smelt colored jerk bait. I've been in other areas where there's smelt feeders. They really want that white, that bright, that albino, anything in that white pattern that looks like a smelt. On a lot of our lakes, they want perch colored patterns. They have varying perch color patterns depending on what the perch look like. When you get up to Winnie, the perch are more green, right? You got that really green color. You get up to Leech, the perch are more like golden yellow. And you get out to Mille Lacs, it's more of that yellow perch, that dull perch color. So any of those perch varying colors, it could be in the golds, it could be just in the perch pattern. Gold works great. Also, don't overlook the black and silvers, especially on Mille Lacs where you have a ton of Cisco's. Like right now on Mille Lacs Lake, there is just a pile of small Tullaby Cisco's that are in that 6 to 8 inch range. So don't sleep on your silvers, your silver and black, your purple backed baits, anything like that in a jerk bait, because there are so many Cisco's feeding up on these bugs, just like these perch are, and these walleyes are up there feeding on them. So don't overlook it. Don't just load yourself up with perch color. Make sure you have plenty of golds and silvers. You have plenty of purple backed baits. Purple works great everywhere. So any body of water you go to, if you've got Cisco's in the system, make sure you have some of these really natural pelagic type of colors, not just your perch colors. Now, as far as throwing these baits out, I like to use a 7.1, 7.2, 7.4 foot rod is my preferred choice. I like standing in the bow. I like using my forward facing sonar. Here's the deal though. A lot of times when you shoot them with forward facing, here's the key element to catching fish on a jerkbait, to catching walleyes in particular on a jerkbait, is casting past them. Okay, so what I love about the Mavericks, what I love about the Shadow Wraps, is they've got the kind of weight forward design, the rattles in them, so you can really huck them out there. I like using a 7.1, a 7.4 rod with like an 832 braid. Okay, I typically use a 10-pound braid. I'll use a fluorocarbon leader, about a 2 to 3 foot leader. I like to use 10-pound just because, I fish a lot of lakes that have zebra mussels, and I don't want to break off. I don't want, if I'm getting into areas where I'm casting up onto a shelf, for example, and I'm working that bait off the shelf, if I'm accidentally bumping bottom or anything, anywhere I can get nicked at all, I use a fluorocarbon leader because then I know I'm not going to break off. Also, what also loves jerk baits in addition to walleyes is pike. And so if I'm in systems, like just the other day, I was casting on walleyes. This pike came out of nowhere. It was actually a good sized pike. Came out of nowhere and cracked my jerk bait. I was able to get that fish in the boat and not break off because I had that 10-pound fluorocarbon leader. So 7.1, 7.4, medium, extra fast. I use that Myth Series 13 rod. I really like that 7.4 for casting these baits. But using the braid, the fluorocarbon, what I like about having that fluorocarbon leader on there and tied to my jerkbait is when you're slashing these baits sideways, what happens if you tie the braid direct? First of all, you have the line visibility issue, especially when the water's this clear. But more so, when those baits slash sideways, a lot of times those treble hooks will come up. Those red line treble hooks in particular are very sticky. And what happens is they'll slap sideways and grab your braid and then follow your hooks. And so what you want to do is run a fluorocarbon leader on there. You want to throw it out there, slap that thing sideways, and you want that bait to throw sideways. Now, here's the key to fishing a jerk bait. I'm going to give you sort of the cheat code to fishing a jerk bait properly, because a lot of people, I get to fish with tons of different customers of varying skill levels. And almost always when I get people in the boat that have never thrown a jerk bait, they often fish it more like a crankbait where they're constantly moving it. You have to stop this bait and you have to throw it sideways. Okay. If you're not doing that, you're just not going to get the bites that you normally would if you're doing the proper cadence. So pitching it out there, pitching it past the fish. And then what I like to do is I give it a few quick cranks. And when I jerk it on the first initial, let's say action to the bait, is I point the rod straight down and I actually rip it straight down in the water column, a couple different cranks, and then I stop. Okay. The Shadow Rap is slow sinking. So, and the Maverick will sink just a little bit, but both of them are suspending baits. So it's not like they sink at a rapid rate, but they sink just ever so slightly. So I'll give it a few rips straight down in the water column, right? But then I let it sink just ever so slightly, trying to get that bait a little bit lower in the water column, especially if my fish are down in 12, 13, 14 feet. Okay. I let that sink for just momentarily. And then the next few cracks of the rod, I go off to the side. Okay. But I'm always bringing that rod tip back towards the bait. Okay. What that's going to do for you is you're going to fish it on a slack line, first of all. But then second of all, it's going to throw that bait sideways. So when I rip it off to the side, I automatically bring my rod back. If you're continually just ripping off to the side and reeling, you're always just moving that bait. You need that bait to stop and pause and sit in the water column. That's when you're going to get your strikes. Now, as far as my cadence of mixing up the jerk baits, what I do is rip, pause, and then one rip, pause, and then pop, pop, pop. And I might even go into a 3 and then a 2. It's really erratic the way I'm jigging this cadence, but adding long pauses. You'll watch these fish, especially in clear water, rise up from whatever depth they're at to come up to that bait. And almost always, they're going to hit it on the pause. And so letting that bait pause longer than you think you should, a lot of times is key to fishing that bait. And then just when they're about to strike it, I'll crack it one more time. And it's the ultimate game of cat and mouse. It's super fun working these baits. Get your pen and pencils out. Shadow Rap deeps, okay? Maverick 110 deep. Those are going to be your best friends during a bug hatch, and you're going to have a lot of fun doing it. If you have a forward-facing sonar, if you want to get good at fishing jerk baits for walleyes, go pick up those baits. Pick up the natural colors, the perch colors, the chromes and blues, the blackback moss. You know, a lot of these colors are really good for pelagic fish. Don't sleep on purple, and don't forget to pick up some whites, especially if you're heading to lakes where there's a lot of smelt, or if you're in really stained, dirty water, you're going to want some of those brighter colors as well. Pick them up. You're going to have a lot of fun doing it. So let's take a quick pause. When I come back, I want to talk about fishing smallmouth bass in a bug hatch, and we'll wrap this podcast up. I know we've got some great reports coming in. I've got Marcus Quam dialed up. I've got some other people, some contributors. We've got Leech Lake reports. I've got some stuff for you on Mille Lacs. As we get more into some of this bug discussion, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk smallmouth strategies. This is the most exciting time of year to fish smallmouth on these bodies of water. You're going to want to stay tuned. We got more Dialed In Angling after this. Arneson's Rocky Point Resort in northern Minnesota offers a little something for everyone. Nestled on Lake of the Woods' South Shore, it provides easy access to 14 remarkable reefs. Serious anglers know that Arneson's offers some of the best fishing, charter fishing, and small boat fishing options, all supported by the largest protected marina on the lake's South Shore. Accommodation selections range from 1 to 5 bedrooms. Equipped with all the modern conveniences, guests can enjoy a delightful dining experience and stunning lake views at the Rock Harbor Lodge, an on-site, full-service bar and restaurant. The two beaches provide hours of fun for the whole family. Whether you're seeking an idyllic fishing spot or a relaxing vacation, Arneson's Rocky Point has everything you need. Check them out at arnesonsresort.com. All right, guys, let's get into, we'll shelf the walleye talk and get into some smallmouth talk here. Like I said earlier, one of my favorite things to do during a bug hatch is smallmouth bass fish. If you have smallmouth, and even largemouth too, you can be said for largemouth, but smallmouth bass to me is my favorite bass fishing to do. Fallen in love with it since I've been a kid, growing up on a lake river system where we had smallmouth. Absolutely loved catching smallmouth as a kid. I was enamored by them. Just a cool species. They can be totally pelagic. They can relate to rock piles. They can relate to timber. They can be on the edge of weed lines. They're constantly roaming. They're constantly changing the way they feed. Prior to, sort of the big smallmouth boom on Mille Lacs Lake, for example, it seemed like, you go out to Mille Lacs and, for me in particular, I spent more days walleye fishing than bass fishing when I was younger. But even before the smallmouth boom, I was just absolutely enamored with the smallmouth on Mille Lacs because of the overall size, the numbers. I mean, I remember having days where I went out there for the first time just targeting smallmouth all around the lake, and I'd have 100+ fish days. But it was always amazing to me how quickly they'd change from, let's say, feeding on tubes to feeding on surface baits to feeding on jerk baits. They're always constantly moving, swim baits. They're changing the way that, the techniques that you're fishing will change pretty rapidly. And during a bug hatch, this is the case. And it almost always coincides with sort of the post-spawn bite, but you start getting these bug hatches. My favorite way to catch smallmouth is on topwater. There's days where I drop my customers at the dock and I'll call my son or buddies or whatever, and I'll be like, hey, the topwater bite is like on. So if you guys want to meet me on the dock after work, I will fish till dark because it is so much fun targeting smallmouth on topwaters. And the cool part about it is these fish can be anywhere. You don't have to pull up to a rock pile to catch them on top during a bug hatch. Just like the walleyes, they get really pelagic. They get suspended in the water column. They're chasing bugs off of structure. And so a lot of times you're chasing down wolf packs, either with your forward-facing sonar or like back in the day, I would just, on a dead flat calm day, I would just look for smallmouth hitting the surface, either on rock piles or adjacent to some of the structure, and just hunt them down. It's probably one of my favorite things to do when it comes to smallmouth fishing. If you get a dead flat calm day during a bug hatch, hot sunshine, doesn't matter. If you're seeing packs of smallmouth hitting the surface, if you don't have any sort of surface bait in your boat, you need to drive to shore, go to any bait shop around the lake and find yourself a popper, a walking bait, a buzz bait, anything you can get, and get your buns back out to Mille Lacs Lake, because you're going to have the funnest time on the water that you're possibly going to have in your whole life. And so what you do is you hunt them down just like you'd hunt down packs of tuna. Now, with forward-facing sonar, I could see these fish up there. Yesterday, I was on a small lake. It had smallmouth bass. It had walleyes. All the bass were subsurface. I started out in the morning. We were doing a combo trip where I was half walleye fishing, half smallmouth bass fishing. I threw a slip bobber out on a pack of walleyes, and out of nowhere, a smallmouth came up and hit my bobber. I instantly reeled up that bobber rod and grabbed a popper and threw it out there, and we started catching them, and we ended up topwater fishing all day long. And so here are some of my go-to baits when it comes to fishing smallmouth on top. First, one of my favorites this time of year when the water's a little colder before it warms up would be poppers. Okay. X-Wrap Pop is a great bait. A chug bug, storm chug bug, excellent bait. Any sort of walking bait. I do like all sorts of different walking baits. Prop baits can be really well. If you talk to different smallmouth anglers, they're going to give you your favorite bait, right? Whether it's a prop bait, whether it's a popper, whether it's a walking bait. I like to do combos of all three. Okay. I usually start with poppers. Poppers are probably easiest for my customers to fish. If you got kids in the boat or younger people in the boat or people that are just less skilled, poppers are easy to fish. Now, when you're fishing a popper, just like a jerkbait, it's easy to fish it too quickly. And so when you throw it out there, what you want to do is let it hit the water and then pop it and let it sit. Pop it, let it sit. What I liked about the Rapala baits, in particular, the X-Wrap Pop, for example, it's got that dressed treble on the back. Even the chug bugs, they've got that tinsel tail dressed treble. You're going to want to throw them out there, pop them, and then just let them sit. Smallmouth bass key on that dressed treble so hard all the time that a lot of times they'll come up and just grab that thing, or you know when they're really on if they're breaching, right? It's like Shark Week. You see these fish come out of the water just T-boning these baits, and poppers are really, really easy to fish. My next bait would be a prop bait. I love using prop baits as well. Throwing it out there, same sort of manner, like ripping that prop bait, letting it sit, ripping that prop bait, changing up your cadence, and you can change up your cadence with your poppers too, where it's like, bop, bop, let it sit, just like with the prop bait. You watch that water spin and those smallmouth come up and hit it. Next would be like a walking bait, like a skitter walk, a V skitter, a skitter walk, any sort of walking bait. That requires a little more skill on the angler's level. Now, if you want to get good at fishing walking baits, now is the time to do it. Take your skitter walks, go to, Bass Pro, Cabela's, Fish USA, wherever you get your tackle. Pick up some walking baits and you can get good at it. Now, I use a walking bait on a casting rod. I've seen some people use them on spinning rods. I've done it in a pinch where, you walk it on a spinning rod. I just, with a casting rod, for me, I can walk a walking bait much better. It's just the way I've fished them my whole life. But the funny part, in that same breath, I use a spinning rod for jerk baits. So I know that's funny to people, especially down south. Like, I have a lot of customers that come up from down south and they see me throw a jerk bait on a spinning rod and they just look like they act like I'm from the moon. They're just not used to doing that. It's however you get comfortable fishing that cadence. A walking bait, I definitely use a casting rod. One key thing that you can do to all of your walking baits, you don't have to do this, but something, for me that just triggers more bites, is I take my walking baits and I put a dressed treble on there. There's a lot of different walking baits out there. Rapala came out with the Jowler a couple of years ago. You got skitter walks. If it doesn't have a dressed treble, pick up the VMC dressed trebles, put a dressed treble on the back of that thing. You're just going to catch more fish. I kind of like that pink and red, anything bright like that. Even that red color works great. But if you dress that back treble hook, when you're walking that bait, you're going to add some pauses in there. And even if you're not adding pauses, a lot of times smallmouth are inefficient feeders and they'll come up and they'll hit that bait mid-bait. If you put that dressed treble on there, you're going to start catching more fish because they key in on that dressed treble. So those are my three go-tos this time of year. If you're out walleye fishing on Mille Lacs or Leech or any of these small lakes, if you've got smallmouth, if you got largemouth on a lake, if you're really struggling with the walleyes and they're just on lockdown mode because of, the bug hatch, switch to smallmouth bass fishing. You're going to have a lot of fun. This time of year is super electric. Don't let bug hatches screw up what you're planning on doing, or, don't go into a bug hatch situation with sour grapes. If you use these techniques that I talked about for walleye fishing, if you use these techniques that I'm talking about for bass fishing, you can have a ton of fun on the water during these bug hatch periods, and hands down, just like greatly exceed your expectations. Everyone hears about a bug hatch. They think Debbie Downer, the bite's down. It doesn't have to be. So One more quick break, and we're going to get into some of the fishing reports from the guys. We got a lot of great information coming from our regular contributors. I appreciate these guys each and every week giving fishing reports. All of them are busy guides, so I'm handpicking different fishing reports, different weeks. This week, we've only got a few reports for you. Next week, we'll have a few more. I don't want to wear these guys out. They're running every single day this time of year, and so I really appreciate them taking the time, giving us some fishing reports. Tune in their fishing reports, and we'll be back with the more Dialed In Angling after this.
Hey, this is Marcus Quam here with Real Therapy Guide Service to give you a fishing report in the Webster, South Dakota area. Our fishing has been really good. We've been catching fish on a variety of different tactics. A lot of it has been to do with all these weeds that have been popping up. So we've still been casting. We're getting fish on a lot of plastics. We've been using mares and jerks, doing a little bit with shallow shad wraps. Kind of just driving around, scoping, finding little pockets with weeds and fish in them, set up, cast on them. For the days where it's a little bit calmer and slicker out, we've been throwing some bobbers on them. And then if I've had a full boat with people that can't cast, I've been getting them pulling bottom bouncers and crawlers. The majority of fish I've been finding have been, I would say, 12 foot of water or less. And it's been good. A lot of nice fish, a lot of nice eaters, still getting some big ones. So yeah, it's been a really good time around Webster here at the beginning of June so far.
Hey, Josh Bullivant here with your current Leech Lake report. Currently, the water is in that mid-60s. We had a little bit of a cold front come through, but just like clockwork, those mayflies are starting to hatch across the lake, and that has slowed the fishing a little bit right now. The guys going out are still finding fish in that 10 to 15-foot range, edges of the weeds, any of the mid-lake rock structures around Sub, Annex, Pelican Island, Bear Island area, and then the weeds looking at Boy Bay area, up in Portage, Sucker Bay, in that same 12 to 15 feet. Slip bobber with a leech or a half a night crawler has been working best right now. And don't be afraid to make sure that you grab a few of those Maverick 110s, especially the deep diving ones, and cast those as well if you aren't getting any bites to get that reaction strike, especially with the bugs. The smallmouth bass continue to be good. Along as they're in the post spawn now, they're starting to move back out to the deeper rock humps and piles around the lake. And then, of course, muskie fishing is in full swing right now on Leech Lake. We opened up a few weeks ago, and a few guys are finding them off of the weedy edges and weed areas, same spots that you'd find those walleyes right now. So bug hatch is here. It's going to slow down fishing a little bit. But as always, once the bugs are done hatching, it's back to catching walleyes. So good luck, and we hope to see you guys out on the lake.
What's going on, guys? Brandon Olson here with Lockjaw Guide Service with an Otter Tail County fishing report. Fishing continues to be amazing up here. I feel like a broken record saying it, but the walleye fishing has been crazy good. Most of our fish we're finding right now are in and around the outside edges of the cabbage. We are starting to see them kind of disperse out into the main lake, off into the basins, off the tip of the points and stuff. So that's going to be a real thing here very shortly. But for right now, currently, cabbage is still king. And you can about throw anything you'd like. Jigs and plastics, jerk baits, crank baits, slip bobbers, Lindy rigs. Yeah, you can kind of throw just about anything. Each little pod kind of got their own desires and their own attitudes. So play around a little bit and don't get married up into any one presentations. Panfish wise, we're finding our fish in the cabbage. Bluegills are pretty hot and heavy right now. The crappies are a little more spread out, and they should be grouping up here as the time goes on. So we did lose a little water temp this week. We are back down to about 63 to 65 on most of our lakes. Didn't seem to slow the fish down much, but we did drop a little bit there. So looking at the weather, looks like we're going to have some pretty nice stable stuff kind of coming here for a while. Fishing's going to continue to get really, really good. If you guys want to fish the Otter Tail Lakes area, you sure can give me a call at 218-640-0158. Otherwise, you can always find us on our website at www.lockjawguideservice.com. Thanks, guys.
All right, that's a wrap for me when it comes to bug hatches. Hopefully, if you're heading out this weekend or this next week, I guarantee, on a lot of bodies of water in northern Minnesota and even central Minnesota, you're going to see bug hatches. You're going to see more and more as we get towards the 4th of July. Don't sweat it. If you pick up some jerk baits, you pick up your bobber rods, get some sniper swivels, even get some hair jigs, you can overcome them with walleyes. You can fish different techniques. Bug hatches don't have to be the doldrums of summer. They really don't. You just have to fish a little bit differently. You have to seek out some of these areas where, they're in varying stages of these bug hatches and work with it. If you're an angler that can change on a dime and you're willing to go out and try different things, you're going to put a lot of fish in the boat during a bug hatch when your buddies aren't. So hopefully I give you some insight into how I fish different bug hatches. Definitely, if you don't have any topwater and you're going out to Mille Lacs Lake, if you're going out to Leech Lake, if you're going to any body of water that has smallmouth, pick up some X-Wrap pops, pick up some walking baits, some prop baits. You're going to have a ton of fun. If you got kids in the boat, if you got people that have never experienced topwater smallmouth fishing, bug hatches are the time period to do it. So good luck to everybody. As always, I'm Tony Roach. Thanks for tuning in to the Dialed In Angling podcast. And good luck fishing, everybody. Until next week, I'm Tony Roach, and this has been the Dialed In Angling podcast.